afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining. I'm Chris Clark from ATI to introduce this next iteration of this six-part webinar series. For a couple housekeeping items, if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A portion of the Zoom. You'll see that at the bottom or top or side of your screen, depending on how you have it set up. If you don't see Q&A there, click the three dots that say More, and you'll see Q&A under that menu that pops up. Uh, and then additionally, we do have the slides posted for this webinar. We have them posted on our ATI CMMC resources webpage. I just put a link in the chat for you all to see. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded, and in the next few days, we'll get the recording posted on that same webpage, where you can also view recordings of the previous webinars. So now I'll go ahead and introduce Derek White from Brillium InfoSec, who will be leading this webinar.
All right, thank you, Chris. Appreciate it as always. Welcome back to returning guests for this, which now been going on for quite a while, webinar series. So thank you very much for that. Excited to introduce our guest for today here in a second. But before we do that, a little bit of an agenda, what's to come here for today, and also a little bit about what we talked about last time, because it does overlap a little bit, which is kind of the intent of this whole series. But as Chris said, make sure to get those questions into the Q&A, as we will try to monitor those prior to the live Q&A at the end, so we can prioritize some of that. I'm getting an echoey situation here. Let me know if that changes. So yes, please do that. Do not use the chat for that, because that will be harder for us to maintain. So a couple things. First and foremost, as Chris just mentioned, there is a link in the chat. It is in all of the items after the fact that talk about all of the webinars that we've done both this year and last year, and I think even stretching back into 2024. And you'll see that on one page. At the bottom, you'll see the older ones, which you'll see a little bit here on the screen, which we started these from kind of the beginning, and then went through everything in kind of order of what to know back then as the regulations started to take form and started to happen with the assessments. And then we have now transitioned into a more recent webinars here. As you can see on that same website, last time we talked about CUI, pursuing contracts with CUI, and Chris and the ATI team did a great job with that. Before that, we had the lead CCA's breakdown. We had Glenda Snodgrass, if those that attended to that. These have been really, really good educational sessions, and we put them all on that website for you to share internally, go back and look at, understand, deep dive. And then, of course, if you want to talk further with the subject matter experts that are attending, then we are happy to make those introductions. You'll also see the video presentation and the slides themselves on that website as well. So any questions there, let me know at the end, and then we'll wrap this version of the series here coming up with a date to be announced very, very soon. So introductions, excited for this one. I have a good friend of ours. I've known Corinne Wise as Chief Executive Officer of Wise Technical Innovations for quite some time. And anytime we are able to get together, which we were last week at an industry event in Orlando, the conversations get very spirited, sometimes even emotional. But a lot of things have actually kind of just materialized even while we were down there. And so we'll touch a little bit on that today. But you can see by Corinne's detailed background here, which I'm not going to read through the whole thing, she is the person you want to be talking to and presenting on this type of topic when it comes to the flow down and what it means to you and your contract and your pursuits, and etc. Corinne, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Yes, and we are both struggling with our voices because of being away for a week, talking to everybody under the sun. So if you could spend just a couple seconds about yourself. I know people hate doing this, but just to kind of let the audience know here about you and what you guys do, and then we'll kind of roll into some of the stuff from the top.
Thank you. Well, I do want to apologize for my voice. I think I caught the flu at KiwiCon. I was thinking of making a t-shirt that said I went to KiwiCon and all I got was influenza A or whatever's going around right now. But I am Corinne Wise, and I'm here in Norfolk, Virginia at Wise Technical Innovations. We're really proud to be playing the role of being an authorized training provider for the CMMC program and teaching a lot of the different assessors in the ecosystem through what we call the CMMC Certified Professional course, which has also become really popular with the DIB. It's funny now, at least 50% of our classes for assessors are actually filled with contractors who are trying to get ready, which makes sense because they have to do self-assessments and they have to learn how to assess as well. So we spend half of our time doing that, and the other half we spend assessing. So we are a C3 PAO, and we are actively engaged in assessments with the DIB right now, which has been really exciting and really wonderful to see all the things that are coming forward during assessment and the great job that they're doing getting through it.
Yes, it is definitely an energetic and chaotic time for everybody from all angles, which is expected with regulation like this taking effect. So we are going to drill down a little bit further than we did the last time when it came to contract pursuits, where it starts to then kind of rubber meets the road on what the flow down means to those that might be a little bit further down the chain or maybe obtaining something for the first time, how it applies to you, and some of those details. So we're going to start with what the regulations say, and we have highlighted some of these. We didn't put links on every single reference here. That will be something you can easily Control F or Google these terms after the fact when you have the slides to read through them. We're kind of highlighting some of the details. We can't put everything on a slide, otherwise it would be size 1.2 font.
Yes.
So yeah, so we're gonna start here. So the Corinne, starting with the part 170, the 32. Do you want to roll through what that means and kind of start highlighting where we'll dive a little bit further into the DFARS language from here?
Good. So the two places that we look for the regulation is it's got two important halves. One is the program itself, which is Title 32, Part 170. And the other part is 48 CFR, which is where the enforcement comes in all of the contracts and the provisions, the contractual clauses and the provisions that the DIB sees during the time of solicitation and also during the time of award. So during the time of solicitation, they're likely to see a provision for CMMC in the future that will have some requirements in it that let them know what it's going to take to be eligible to win that work. And then upon award, they'll be entering into having some of the CMMC contract language, which is another important part of Title 48. And so those are the two drivers for what's going on right now. One became final over a year ago, and that was the CMMC program. And at that time, we were set free to go ahead and perform assessments, but it was voluntary. And a lot of them are still voluntary because not many people have a true, you must get a third party assessment requirement now that the program just got rolling. And then recently, at the end of 2025, we finally got the second half, which is 48 CFR becoming final and that enforcement portion being able to be utilized by contracting officers and those provisions and clauses being available to them.
Yeah, no, that's kind of some of the stuff we got into 2 webinars ago, and it's kind of been a touchy part of the presentations as it's taking shape, is that there had to be a program in place first before it can be required. So
Right.
that's why this has rolled out the way it has. So if anybody feels confused or how come I have this, we're going to get a little bit into some of the DFARS clauses that you've seen or maybe have seen or heard about if you don't have contracts yet, but also the ones that you have also seen have just kind of changed the numbers a little bit. So we're going to talk about that next. But yes, to be able to have something like CMMC, which is a way for the DoD to ensure data is protected throughout the entire supply chain, which is the intent of this whole program, to make sure the requirements are in place. You have to have a program first and then a requirement to then implement the program. So I should say require the program, if you will. So that's really good. Thank you for highlighting that. Again, we can't go through every single detail about everything, otherwise we'll be here till Christmas. So we're going to roll through then into the next layer, which is the DFARS related
Are you
requirement.
sharing screens? I'm not seeing the
I
slides.
have to go one more slide.
Okay, there we go.
Yes, sorry, I clicked the button and it didn't move. So thank you for that. So yes, now
Yeah.
we're going to get into the DFARS specific clauses that are important to the contract. Let's talk about that a little bit. So let's start from the top, 7012.
I am not seeing your slides, so I am
Oh,
going to actually, is anyone else? Am I the only one who's not seeing them, perhaps?
it says I'm
Hey,
sharing.
Derek, I can see your slides. It looks like, okay. Thank you, Ryan, who just chatted, and Nick, that you're able to see the slides as well.
Okay, let me do something really quick, Derek, and pull up the deck that you gave me so that I can
Oh,
follow
yeah,
along, because
interesting.
I do not get to see
For
them.
everybody's awareness, the Zoom did an update this morning as the team at ATI found out, and has had a little bit of a flourish of things that don't work very well. So this is maybe one of them. So
Yeah.
sorry for that.
That the
Yes, that was,
presenters, maybe don't get to see the slides, but I've got it right here, so no worries. I just wanted to make sure that I was able to follow along with you and speak on each point.
yeah, all good.
Yeah, I'm here now. And so you're moving on to
Slide
title.
5. Yes,
Okay,
the
there we go.
forest clauses and flowdowns. Yep.
Okay, good. And so one of the things I was going to go ahead and put in the chat as we leave the last conversation is a link to what Title 32, Part 170 is actually saying about flow down. It has a really good section where it says so simply something that makes perfect sense. It says it's driven by the data. Everything is driven by the data. So if you are trying to win a contract and it's got FCI in it, and the contracting officer puts level 1 requirements in it, you can expect that whoever you're going to flow that FCI, federal contract information, down to, they're going to have to be doing the same, right? They're going to have to meet that same requirement. And at level 1, it's all self-assessment. So you're like, okay, good to go. That's not going to be so hard. Same thing at level 2. If the data that is involved with this contract is determined to be sensitive enough that it needs level 2, but they say, you know what, let's do level 2 self-assessment based on the data type, then you can expect that whoever you're going to share that data with, it's up to you to make sure that that company also has done the level 2 self-assessment requirements, which means they are doing a self-assessment the proper way at the what we call the objective level. They have put those results and that attestation or affirmation into the supplier performance risk system. And that's what makes somebody officially level 2 self-assess. You can say I self-assessed all day long, but until you take that step of tying it to an affirmation and your cage code, then it's not real. It becomes real when you do that, and you become compliant when you do that. And the company that wants to work with you becomes able to follow the rules when you do it that way. So all those steps are really important to reiterate. And in that link that I just put out there, it just goes through each thing, and it just says simply, if it's requiring, level 3 third party, and you're going to flow down that information to the contractor, then they're going to have to be the same. So whatever it is, they have to meet it. Now, if there's a way to work with them and not give them the data, the next best question is, do they have to do it still? Not necessarily. So if you're not going to be sharing the data, this is very data driven. You can, try to attack this a bunch of different ways, but I don't think most primes are going to want to go through the trouble of, going through the granular process of saying, oh, it's going to be too hard on that sub if we share data with them. We won't make them do that, but we will make this sub do it. They're going to be trying to get through this just like everybody else. And every single company that's certified at the highest level is going to make life easier on them, right? They're gonna know that. They're going to be paying attention to that. Great.
Yeah, and there will be some lessons learned and some clarity parts that will take place as a lot of people are frantically trying to do what's best for them, and then that's why we're talking about the flow down, is that if you have responsibility beneath you and you are flowing down, as Corinne's saying, data to a supplier or a sub or whoever, that you're not to be doing that unless they're authorized to meet, to do that, and then they're going to meet the requirements, which is why CMMC will become the main driver for whether they can procure business to somebody as part of a contract, if they are indeed, as Corinne said, in good standing and certified to the level they're supposed to be based on the data that they handle. So, along the timeline of DFARS and CMMC rollout, there were some clauses that were thrown in interim. I forget the year of 20 into 2020 to 2021, I believe, is
Yeah.
when it went into effect. I can't keep all the dates straight anymore, but it seems like that wasn't that long ago, but yet it was. And there were some recent changes here that I think are very important to talk about on kind of the here and now and where things are going before the actual clause of 7021, which is the CMMC program requirement that will be in the contract. Can we just briefly touch,
Yeah.
Corinne, on what just happened, a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago?
It was like an explosion, right? It was like the bomb drop. They just shook everything up. I will tell you that I found your slides, and what it is, I'm a pretty technical person, but they did put a little new interface here on Zoom where I had to go over a tab in order to see your slides. So I just want you to know I am following you now. On what they did to us is, to me, it wasn't that shocking. I think I saw the writing on the wall that there was some duplication going on. So let's start with 7012, which hasn't changed and remains the same. 7012 is our kind of the basis for everything. It's where that 800-171 is required to protect CUI is rooted. That's that 7012, and we're going to see it on another slide, says a lot of important things. But one of the important things it says is if you have CUI, you must protect it using NIST SP 800-171. So that still saying the same good old faithful 7012. 7025 and 7021 are our brand new 48 CFR provision and clause. During the time of solicitation, you're going to be looking for 7025 to tell you what the requirements are to be eligible to win this work. And it's going to say level 1 self-assess, or it's going to say level 2 self-assessment, or it's going to say level 2 third-party assessment, or you could be really special and going for those really, really good contracts. So might say level 3 DIBCAC assessment required for the most sensitive CUI. So that'll be during solicitation, that will be a provision. And then upon award, the CMMC program requirements will be enforced through 7021, which has things like annual affirmations, maintaining your compliance status, and all of the CMMC programmatic obligations tied into it as a contractual clause. And then 252-204-7997, let's talk about what the way things were and the way things are now. We in addition to those other things that we've mentioned so far, there used to be a provision called 252-204-7019. That was what drove us into SPRS to enter a score. That's it. I always told students, when you think 7019, think I have to enter something in SPRS. Now, what's going to do that, what's going to drive that is that 7025. So what they did is they said, we're no longer going to be putting 7019 out there in provisions. We're retiring its use. Does it mean if you have it right now, you don't need to take heed to it? No. It's just not going to be used moving forward. So 7019 had a different place in SPRS, one tab over, same self-assessment. You had to put the score over on this one tab that was called the basic self-assessment tab. Now under 7025, the other tab is right next to it, adjacent, and it says CMMC assessments. So moving forward, you won't use the 800-171 tab anymore for 7019 unless you still have that requirement, which probably shouldn't be seeing anymore. You will be using the CMMC assessment tab with 7025, and that's where you'll enter the results of your self-assessment. And it's a much more detailed wizard. It takes you down to the objective level, but same game, different interface. And then 7020 was what went along with that and said the DIBCAC can come and assess when they need to, if they want to. And that is still here. It's just being called something different. 7997 is replacing 7020, which is allowing DIBCAC assessment teams, which is the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center the ability to come assess when they need to. And they are just very similar to CMMC assessment teams, but they are government assessment teams. They run their assessments the same as we do, but they also run the level 3 assessments.
Yep. No, that's we're gonna break that down. We have a table coming up here too that will kind of get into the chart on what type of assessment based on how things are laid out in the program now, which is a really good resource for everybody as you start to plan this if it's new to you or it's something you're trying to finish up. Really useful from that standpoint. So we're gonna move on to from here the understanding of the current regulations, sort of where the main focuses tend to be, so that people can. I think this is always a really good slide to use for why we're doing it. You know, why are they making contractors do this to defend the warfighter, for example. So we want to roll through these at all, Corinne, on highlighting some of these factors.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just always important to remember that this is, I mean, if anyone has a contract and they search for 7012, I wouldn't search for the whole thing because you're likely to do like a little typo and think you don't have it, but search for 7012. And if you have a contract that is expected to have some CUI exchange involved with it, it's going to have this clause for sure. And it requires that first block is basically saying make sure you use 800-171 and the 110 requirements and 320 objectives to secure the CUI. The second one requires you to, do cyber incident reporting. Some things about this that people just gloss over is that requirement that we're here for today, which is to flow down to subcontractors. You're actually supposed to look through C through G on that 7012 and flow that down to contractors. And when we were with the DIBCAC, many people may not know what joint surveillance voluntary assessments were, but they were the assessments before the C3PAOs were allowed to assess all on our own. We had to assess with the DIBCAC. And I wouldn't say they were babysitting us, but they kind of were. And so we could not run assessments without them. And they would watch us and they would allow us to conduct the entire assessment. And at the end, they would do what they called a 7012 checklist assessment. And they would bust out 7012. And yes, they would ask that contractor for their contracts. And they would look for the flow down clauses in those contracts with their subs. And so that tells you how serious they are about flowing down to sub. The other thing that is required is that you only use service providers if you are processing, storing, or transmitting CUI in that cloud service that are FedRAMP moderate or equivalent, authorized, FedRAMP moderate authorized or equivalent. Does that sum it up pretty well, Derek, you think, or did I miss anything?
No, that's yeah, it's the overall kind of this mindset for those, if this is your first session or you're starting to do education on this, is it's all about the data. And if you're going to handle it in systems that aren't the government's,
Yeah.
because you're going to provide work and services, then those non-federal systems have to meet the requirements because they don't trust anything under the sun. And there's different ways to do it. Splice it up. We say this all the time. It's not prescribed. So if you want to have your internal team build out infrastructure to protect this data that the DoD is saying and DOW is saying that you need to do, then great, you can do it. There's guides, there's assessment guides, there's all sorts of resources for that. If you want to leverage an external party, whether it's a managed service provider or a cloud service provider or cloud services for just pieces of your puzzle, then you can do that. But as we all know, you go into clouds, they have to prove where that data is at, and that's also meeting the same requirement standards as on-prem infrastructure. So they have to follow things like FedRAMP, moderate baseline. They can get authorizations, they can get equivalency, and then MSPs that are working with you and managing your infrastructure for you are also responsible for their piece of the puzzle as well. And you have to make sure that that's your responsibility to make sure that they are. We'll talk a little bit more about that later too. But yes, that is the path that has been given. Is you can do what's best for you as long as you meet the requirements. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and how they're going to prove that. And this is the what reason that CMMC exists, and the assessments for, and we had a question that I just answered regarding this year 171 is not going away. That is the set of controls that was put together by NIST to protect CUI for those that process and store and transmit that data. CUI is a category of sensitive data. So there is a chart that is out there. I didn't source it here because it's all over the place, but this is the one right from the regulation on what type of assessment you can expect, who's going to perform it, what's the requirement for it, and how that works. You want to walk through this a little bit, Corinne, about what's happening right
Yeah.
now?
I mean, this looks like a confusing slide, but I'm going to make it very simple. There are 4 types of assessments happening right now, and they're driven by the clauses that were in that provisions and clauses that were in the first few slides. And essentially, if you're going to have controlled and classified information, you're going to be looking at either a self-assessment, but it has to be done correctly. You can't have an incorrect score and say, I didn't really know how to do it, or I didn't know what that requirement meant. You got to make sure either you get training on how to do one properly, or you get someone who does understand all the requirements to make sure that your score is accurate. And the other kind would be from a third party like us, a C3PAO. And both of those are driven by the new CMMC program and that provision 7025 and the clause 7021. Those are the first and the last. But what catches people off guard are the 2 middle non-voluntaries. A lot of people are not aware that the DoD does call people and does ask to assess. And it's more than ever before. We are getting folks that call and say, hey, the DIPCAT called me. They want to come visit for a week, and they're just in shock. And the reasons that they do it aren't always bad. It could be that you're being tapped because you have extremely sensitive CUI and they're trying to keep their finger on the pulse, and it's part of their risk management. Or it could be something that's not so positive. It could be that there's some type of algorithm or a whistleblower or a report that has drawn their attention to the record in SPRS, and they want to confirm it with their own assessment. We've even heard of them coming behind, some C3PO assessments and running an assessment already. That has happened. One of the things I have noticed that they're allowing in some cases is um, if the company that has been asked to do one of these assessments with the DIBCAC says they already have an assessment scheduled with a C3PAO, the DIBCAC will monitor that and allow that assessment to proceed and use the results from that assessment to satisfy the information that they're looking for. So it's very interesting. I can tell you for sure, what triggers it. We don't know. It's a mystery to some degree. But it is real and it does happen, and it's done through some of the contractual clauses that folks agree to when they win the work.
Yeah, and just specifically between what a medium and a high DIBCAC assessment feels like, right? When Corinne says they reach out, they say, "Hey, you've been selected. Congratulations to go through a DIBCAC assessment. We need your stuff sent to us, and it's usually like a week window, some kind of. It's not 6 months from now. They're busy and they are adding to their team. They can only handle so many of these at one time." So you send them the medium. If you've been selected for a medium, you send them your documentation. This is why documentation is so important, because they can tell with a pretty good understanding of if that documentation makes sense or not. And if they have questions on the documentation, they'll set up time to do some interviews and they'll talk. The high is they're going to come visit you, and nobody likes to sit through that. So don't give them a reason to do that, is probably the first thing to say. But if you are prepared, which has been pretty much the theme through all of these webinars, is understanding what's best for you, understanding what sort of scope you have for this data and how it applies to you, then the solutions you can do, internal, external, then it helps to build that confidence. I think you've seen it too as well, Corinne, but having that documentation be really, really well done and organized and gives high confidence, to Corinne's point, then does kind of definitely benefits people. And if it's not, then things usually get elevated. So this is why, as time goes on, CMMC, the program itself, will be the leading way of having assurances that things are in place, but they have to stay there. So we'll talk about that in a future webinar. So there's also confusion. So I want to make sure that we talk about this too. When we met on this and what we wanted to talk about is There's confusions for different reasons. Understanding the requirements and the details of what we're talking about today is where it's not bad confusion all the time. It's not, people shouldn't feel bad that they don't understand every one and zero and every left and right of stuff here. But the DFARS requirements are requirements. And we've already got some questions that we're going to get to during the Q&A on what that means to company A if they have this scenario. So a couple of the confusion points here, Corinne, that you wanted to talk about. Do you want to walk through those before we get into kind of a little bit more depth into the assessment breakdown from a CMMC perspective on the next chart?
Good. And I always, want to just stress that that first question, you definitely want to get legal advice on the first question. Like, um, these are really complex clauses that are in your contracts. And so, which ones do and don't need to be flowed down is not something that you want to get wrong. And I'd have to actually see everything that you've got going on in your contract to know for sure. But we know that there's no way for them to protect the supply chain if any of the ones we're talking about don't get flowed down, right? So they have to be able to require you to protect CUI, and they have to be able to maintain access for investigations. That's a big part of 7012 is if there is an incident and you report it, you will allow access for investigations should we choose to investigate. Now, remember, they get a lot of reports about things that people are concerned are should be reported as an incident, and they can't follow up on every single one with a visit and an investigation. They do a risk-based approach to dealing with that, but they do need the ability to do so, and so common sense tells you why they need you to flow down 7012. Um, and the same thing goes for reporting SPRS scores and things like that. We know that the CMMC program doesn't work if any of it stops with just the prime. That wouldn't make any sense. So common sense tells us that these clauses and provisions have to go through the supply chain. Now, as far as a strategy where you didn't share data, we do say this is data driven. So if someone simply does not have a certain type of data, perhaps they are not someone where this would need to be flowed down to. But again, consulting a lawyer to make sure of what is and isn't CUI, this is a huge question for folks, is really important with that first box. The next one is confusing yearly affirmations with triennial assessment requirements. Whether it's self-assessment or third-party assessment, it's every 3 years that you do the full Monty assessment. But there's also one of the 110 requirements that tells you to do a full assessment. So in order to affirm, you actually are pretty much doing another assessment each year. And what you're affirming is that your status remains the same and that your status is still true. And so that's what you're not running through the full, paying for another assessment with a C3 PAO, for example, every year. But to do that affirmation, most folks are going to run another assessment every year to confidently make that affirmation.
Yeah, and I think with these confusions, put yourself in the Department of Defense, Department of War shoes, right? So they don't want their subcontractors and their supply chain to be switching infrastructure every 3 weeks or trying to do things differently to save a buck and have the data then be at risk. So part of this confidence measure and this buying down the risk for them is again, do it how you want. You're going to now be certifying that you are doing the requirements, and by that you're keeping them there. And one of the big fears is when people do pass their certification, although it's technically a 3-year certification status, as long as nothing changes, what happens if things do change? This is why NIST 100 171 and pretty much every other cybersecurity regulation that's based off of NIST frameworks and other similar frameworks require that at least annually you go through your cybersecurity program and you make sure that if you moved locations or you did change infrastructure or you switched out 2 vendors that were just a piece of it, that those requirements were in place, that you assessed the risk, that you did your plan to get it completed. Did it change your scope? There's a lot of questions around acquisitions of businesses or new contract pursuits, and now we're adding 75 people to our infrastructure. Did that change scope, or did it not? And those are the things that you do need to understand. And it's just no different than if your bank was calling you every month to say that they're moving the vault and they're moving your money and they're changing apps and they're changing stuff. You'd feel a little concerned about where your money is, specifically if they can't provide it to you, which is I think so. The incident side, real quickly before I move on to, that's another thing where incidents are incidents, breaches are breaches. So alerts go off. The whole program here is built around when something feels off, it gets identified, it gets looked at, it gets assessed, and it gets shut off if it was actually an exposure or it could have been and it was going to lead to something. That's a lot of times the questions are, they, like Corinne said, they can't go through everything. So did that stop? Did that damage anything? Is there still a threat being known? This is why CMMC level 3 in advanced cybersecurity regulations will continue to evolve, is that threats will change. AI, all these other things start to come up. They have to evolve these requirements. And if we have a foundational piece like NIST 171, then, and that's in place, that's a really good start, because the basic, not very difficult attacks that are crippling the supply chain for a lot of different industries can be batted away, and that makes things a lot better, so that we can focus on the more advanced threats. So more on that in a future webinar, but we are going to talk about the actual CMMC assessment breakdown. So we talked a little bit about the regulations and what they call out, but this is the true CMMC breakdown of what it means to you as an organization. You hear a lot about self, you used to hear a lot about basic, and now that's all taking form of, do I need a C3PAO and a third party to be scheduled to do this? Do I ever have to expect the DIBCAC, like you said, Corinne, to come in and are they going to look at this, or how do I do this? And some of the details on the right that we're gonna walk through are confusing at times, but also sort of on purpose. You can kind of feel like, because they want it to be done right, they don't want it to be done quickly, if you will. So we want to walk through this a little bit from top to bottom, left to right. This is a really, really important chart.
Yeah. I'll start with a little story about the way it used to be. This story is about minimums, which are new. They're in the 7019 provision. And when you went into SPRS, if you put something really low, you could still get awarded. And I'll tell you, I had a client maybe like 2 years ago, and they became my client because they called me and they were like, "Oh my gosh, I was just about to get awarded this multi-million-dollar contract, and I just got this email from the contracting officer." And she was like, "Oh, we must be mistaken. It appears as though you have no SPRS entry in the SPRS system." And he's like, "What the heck does that mean?" And I'm like, "Well, you haven't done a self-assessment." He's like, "What is that?" I was like, "You have to," I was like, just let me do it. So I do an assessment. It takes we do like a 3 to 4 day assessment on this company, and they get a negative 127, and they just had nothing good going on. So we put it up in the SPRS system, and he was awarded. Within days, he was awarded the contract. So that is the old days. That is not how it's going to be anymore, because there's a minimum now, and that minimum is 88. Whether you're self-assessing or you're getting a third-party assessment, you must achieve a score of 88. And if you're more interested in finding out how scoring works and how to self-assess, I did want to mention that we have a free service every last Friday of the month, which is SPRS Friday. And all that we do is teach you how to do these self-assessments, how scoring works, and why the scoring goes from, negative 203 to 110. And it's because there's a point value associated with every single requirement. And it's like a low, medium, high point value. And it's either worth 1 point, 3 points, or 5 points. So the 110 controls, every one of them has one of those point values assigned to them. And of the 110 requirements, there's only some of them that you're allowed to have in what we call POAM status, meaning they're not met. And there's only I think there's less than 50 of them, isn't it, Derek, that are eligible for POAM, and they even took some away in the new rule. They're all one pointers, the least impactful ones, and you can only have up to 22 of those things not met. So number one, you're limited on which things are even allowed to be in a not met state. Number two, the maximum number of them that could be that way would be 22 things, which, by the way, if you missed 22 one-pointers, would leave you at an 88. That's why it's the minimum score. And you can only carry that minimum score, 88, anywhere from 88 to 109 is only tolerable for a max of 6 months. So you have 180 days to fix that. It's about 6 months, right? Um, and so that's the way it works. So we're not used to this, wow, even with self-assessment, I've got to be at this 88. It backs you into a corner. If you're not at 88, you better not even go into that SPRS system. And, you might as well not, because I can tell you right now, it's very interesting. If you go in there and you try to go through the wizard and it comes out to less than 88, people are like, what's wrong with this thing? It won't finish. It won't let you finish. Or if you try to mark one that is not poemable as not met, it kind of just doesn't let you finish. So it shows you that that score has to be at that level. And that's really simplifies this entire chart and just lets you know there's 3 rules. One, you can only poem certain things and they're very low value. They're one pointers. Only up to 22 of those can have that happen, and only for 180 days. And that's it.
Yeah, and the reason we're highlighting some of this first is that's usually where the conversation starts. Is people want to start kind of backwards and say, um, the checklist approach. Well, I'll start with the 3 pointers and I'll start working through them. And it's like that's very dangerous if you get halfway through what end up being the highest impact. Usually, the most detailed controls that have to be in place, and you can't finish it. Then you have a program that has to start over. That gets very very complex. So now after we've covered kind of the framework side of things and what it looks like if we put ourselves in the shoes of
Oh, wait,
for
before you leave there, I'm
oh
so
yeah.
sorry. I did not cover the first row, which was level 1. There is no poems at level 1. I think it's really important that we say that. Level 1, you can't miss any of the 15 requirements that are in the old 52, 204, 21. They've renamed it, and I can't remember what the new name of that
Mhm.
one is. But at level 1, you have 15 requirements, and they were specified in 52, 204, 21. And those all have to be met for everybody. And they are also existing at level 2, and they're not poemable there either. So just wanted to make sure I said that before we left, Derek. I'm sorry to make you go.
No, that's good. That's actually a really good transition into putting ourselves now in for the rest of the time before we get to Q&A at the end
Yeah,
is the role playing scenario of I'm down here looking up. So the flow down is finding me, and what is it that, and we're going to get some of these questions, so I don't want to tip into the end zone here too quick on some of these, but understanding the impact to your compliance is very important. If you don't have data, that doesn't then does have requirements to be handled in a flow down, which means you have responsibility down to you, or from someone else down to you. Talk more specifically, if you can, around what that means to the contractor. CMMC level 1 is around federal contract information, so we'll leave that one aside for a minute. There's a lot of questions about that. That's a minimum to entry. So if you have federal contracts, you're going to have information about that. We don't want that flying around open to the internet type of thing. But when it gets a little more serious into the controlled unclassified information or CTI, CDI world, what does that mean from the true flow down perspective of a contractor trying to navigate this on what they should and shouldn't be doing because they are or aren't required to do it?
good. Well, it's funny because one of the questions in the chat is about, we're talking about all this stuff. Why aren't we talking about flow down? This is the flow down. You're looking at everything we've just said is the flow down. There is no choice. There is no option on any of this. And if your subcontractors do not have any of the things that we just talked about met, in that table, all the tables that we've been through, they are not eligible to receive the contract data. So the answer to your question, Mark, the reason we're going through all of this is so that you understand that all subcontractors have to be meeting the correct part of each table. And those clauses that we showed relate to the scores that we just went over. They're not a choice as a subcontractor any longer. When you receive a provision with a requirement, they are not someone you can give that data to if they don't meet those same requirements. That's what today's webinar is about, is understanding the days of being able information when they don't meet the requirement gone. It's just not possible anymore. And there's no getting around it. And I saw some great questions about, about other things that I think we're going to cover, but it is new to everyone. So we do understand that there's some imperfect things going on right now. So we see people saying, I'm not getting these requirements from my prime. And what we're trying to prepare you for is you will very, very soon, because the gates just opened and everyone's just getting used to this and warming up to it. And the DoD gave us 1 year to warm up to it, right, Derek? 1 year
Mhm.
of self-assessment only requirements. We haven't seen what's about to happen. And what is about to happen, I think, is going to be really shocking to people. And those flow down to requirements that we just described are going to be very different than anything that we've ever seen before. Nobody's been prevented from being eligible the way they're going to be prevented from being eligible with these new requirements that we've gone over today, flow down wise. So
Yeah, and
everything we've said just isn't for the prime, it's for all their subs. Go ahead.
yeah, I was just saying, what are the to get ahead of some of the questions? I haven't gone through them all, but I'm sure they're in there because this is where and don't shoot the messenger on some of the stuff. So
Yeah.
the scenario that does happen, and it happened with 7012 when it first came out as well, was the primes or contracting officers, they go to, put out information about a bid about a project, and the clause ends up in a solicitation, but the specifics on where the CUI is or isn't going to be in that flow down um, gets challenging for those that do very specific work, and some of it's federal, some of it's defense, and they're trying to navigate. You touched on this a little bit about that legal side of being right about that is very important. Any words of advice? It's just advice, not legal advice, and or anything else for those that strongly feel that what was handed to them as a possible upcoming requirement to do it correctly, which means they have to know the data that they're handling, they have to know then how to protect it within a controlled scope and all that kind of fun stuff, what to do in the event that this is new to them. And they are trying to navigate this, but there's this clause that they don't get a lot of details about in the
And
language. Is there anything you can say there?
I honestly will always believe that the best place to start with all of this is with the CCP classes, because it's a 5-day class. You can get it self-paced or come, but you're going to meet a lot of other people going through the same thing. You're going to learn all those clauses, all the flow down. You go over all 110 controls. You're literally seeing what the assessors are taught to look for. That is the class they take to assess. So you're seeing word for word what they're going to ask and what they're going to need from you as evidence. It's very, very eye-opening. So send somebody to that, or hire somebody who has been to it that can help you through the process. I do see a lot of questions, so I want to make sure that we
Yeah.
get to those.
So I say we can probably start ripping through some of
Yeah,
these.
yeah.
Feel free to pick some. I have a couple that
I see this one. I really want to go to Ben Turry's question. It says, just to reiterate, subcompliance requirements aren't mandated by the contract, but rather the data that they will be exposed to provided by the prime. So I want to make sure I say this clearly. The project manager on the side of the buyer, the DoD, will determine the type of data and CUI that the contract is going to include. And it's not like they can just say, oh, I think this sounds great as a requirement. There's a DoD memo that says if the CUI is in the defense category, that in the future they want that to require a CMMC level 2 third-party assessment requirement. So if you look at the NAR registry, the DoD CUI categories, if you have any of that CUI in the future, after this year of getting ready passes, you're very likely to see the project manager on the DoD side tell the contracting officer to put in a requirement for a third-party assessment because of that memo. Other types of CUI you may be more likely to see a level 2 self-assessment requirement. But again, the requirement that's in the 7025 provision is going to be decided based on the type of data the contract needs to share with the supply chain. And then, yes, the prime will most likely expect its suppliers to meet those requirements so that it can freely share information. I don't think the primes are going to be able to take a lot of time to cherry pick and have different requirements for different folks. From what we're seeing, they want people to be ready. That's what they're telling everybody so that they can make their lives easier. But yes, it is possible for a prime to not share the data. And obviously, they don't have to require someone to meet these requirements if they're not going to give them the data. So yes, Ben, what you said was a short way of saying all of that, but I wanted to make sure I was really clear about that, and I hope that answers your question.
No, that's so there's another question here too, different angle, but it says, understanding correctly or not, all subs on your contract do not have the same level of CMMC requirements as the prime if they are not receiving CUI data. So this is kind of an example of a question from the presentation on the data you handle
Mm-hmm.
that you're in scope of will determine whether you need to be CMMC level 1, 2, or 3.
Kind of, but remember, most people want to work with the primes, and the primes aren't able usually realistically to take time to say, oh, this one will
Mhm.
not need, we'll try not to share the data with them, and we will share the data with this one. Instead, what we're seeing their approach is they want you to get third party assessed so they have the freedom to select you as a supplier when they need you, and they don't have to worry about it. That seems to be their approach. But yes, it is true that if someone is not sharing data with you, you could be excused from the requirements, but it is kind of up to the prime because they don't have to select you and they can ask what they want of their suppliers, from what I understand. Isn't that correct, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing this question possibly stemmed to from what if the data is not um, clear or marked as it
Yeah.
is come down, and I want to do what the prime is asking to do, but when they go to get, and then there's another question that I don't think it's the same person, but regarding subcontractors, flow downs requiring the prime does not provide the CUI data directly to the sub, but there's a possibility that the sub generates CUI data during the project. So that's
Yes.
another one of those difficult scenarios sometimes on where that explanation exists on what the deliverables of the contract are.
Yeah, this part is really hard during this time where everyone's not great at marking and identifying. I think that you're going to see the DoD side getting better at this over the next few years, but it's not a problem we can solve. Unfortunately, some things aren't marked. That doesn't make them not CUI. In a perfect world, you would be clear under your contract terms what CUI you were going to be dealing with in that contract. A lot of times with DoD, it's CTI, controlled technical information. And you would also be clear about when you were creating derivatives of it, and you would be required to mark those derivatives. If you're ever unclear, you need to ask for clarity. It's not okay. Even in assessment, you can never say, I don't know if I have it or not. That's actually one of the reasons that
Mhm.
an assessment can have to stop is if there's a lack of clarity or the company doesn't know their own CUI. They have to really take ownership over what is and what isn't. And that is going to require a new channel of communication between primes and subs.
And there are resources available. You can see on the screen here if you want to send a note into the info at Beryllium email or the CMMC ATI email. We have resources there for that specific scenario where you should have somebody who specializes in helping with that contract reviews and understanding that before making drastic decisions if this is a new pursuit you want to do, or it's never been clear, like Corinne's saying, getting clarity on that is very key. I do want to ask this question, just because it's come up. Yeah, not overly related to the flow down per se, but it does impact the conversations of what you want to pursue, what you want to do now. But can solicitations right now include C3PAO requirements for level 2?
They can, and I haven't been following this as closely as others, but we know that the DoD definitely encouraged that not happen for the first year. They wanted to give the DIB time to adjust, and they were asking that only self-assessment requirements be put in for this first year. But I mean, we're already more than, you know, we're quite a ways through that already. So it's moving fast. And do I think there will be a few contracts before this year is up that do have that requirement? Yes, I do think there will be some that choose to put it in there, and they're allowed to because of the way 48 CFR and the way that the new rule was written. They are allowed to put it in there. Most are respecting the warm up period. Thank goodness.
Yes, in one of the big topics last week at industry conference specific to CMMC and CY at KuiCon was false starts, and it seems there were a lot of organizations who went and got scheduled with C3PAOs because that's what their customer was asking them for, or that's what leadership said they were needed to do, and they just assumed that they'd be ready by that date, and they weren't. And that's, I don't know, maybe my naive way of thinking that what Corinne just said is that the DoD wants you to get it done. They want you to have these requirements in place so the data is secure. Um, Rushing to a third party assessment and not being ready is not a real strategic decision. And sometimes it feels like you're ready, but there are ways to do that. I do want to roll through them because what happens, one of these questions that came up as I was scrolling, as I read this off, um, is what constitutes, from a prime's perspective here, due diligence for the large primes when they are validating their subcontractors' CMMC status as this continues to evolve. So, is certification alone going to be enough for our primes expected to put other oversight measures into that buying down risk factor, if you will, on their suppliers?
Good. We have heard of primes developing their own audit teams. So that is something we have been getting wind of. Having their own teams go out to subcontractors. This has been on contracts that were really important and had very sensitive data, but that is an example of what you're talking about. They're going a step further, they're reducing their risk, and they're not just doing only things that are in Title 32, Part 170, but they're going beyond that. And I think that's what your question was.
Yeah, I mean, at its core, that is what the phased-in approach as CMMC is years into existence will be. Organizations who pass their certification at the required level and keep it there and do their annual requirements as well along their cybersecurity program that will demonstrate a high confidence, and you are required to have this CMMC certification level, and you demonstrate that you do, then you will be invited or be involved in that bidding process and then can be awarded. And to Corinne's earlier point, if you don't have that in place at the time they want to start doing that, then you will not be asked to play in the sandbox at the end of the day until you're ready, which is unfortunate in some cases, but that's what some people are looking to do now is they want to be ready to handle it. I know we're at time here soon, but there are some really good questions here that are probably way more technical on
And I wanted to offer, please, I try to make myself very available. So if I see a lot of those questions and they're really, really good and important ones, please feel free to reach out to me and ask those questions. You can see me on LinkedIn. I'm there. And if you ask me a question, I will try to answer it. I see a lot of university questions.
I was just going to bring
They're
that up.
they're
Yes.
always more complex. And so please don't hesitate if there was a question that was unanswered and you feel like it's burning.
Yeah.
We try to do as much time educating as we can.
And we did have some snafu last time when we had a guest on like this, but we can gather all these questions, and Corinne and I can work together on answering them and sending them back out through ATI, especially if they
Yeah,
lead to a regulation resource that you can go find the answer. So it's not we're not coming up with the answer. We can direct you to the answer.
exactly.
Some of these are observations, which some of them are very good observations. So thank you for providing those. But we can definitely do that. The university thing, yes, I was going to bring that up. Those are hard to answer in this short of a time frame, but. Yes, yeah, Corinne's information is on LinkedIn. Wise Technical Innovations. The website was on the previous slide, one of the previous slides, and so happy to connect. But again, if you want to connect with Corinne, and we understand that these conversations are not always the most fun to have, so that's why we do have the emails on the slide right now. Is that we're happy to do that and make introductions to Corinne, so you can have conversations that are see where we can help and where resources can be applied. So we're happy to do that. I know we're at time, so I'll stop talking and kick it back over. Corinne, thank you for joining on what is a very difficult topic to keep everybody involved in. But thank you again, really appreciate it. And I'll kick it back
Thank
over to
you.
Chris.
Thank you, ATI, for having me. What a wonderful service you offer. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Derek, and thank you, Corin, for all the great information that you provided. And to all the attendees, thank you for joining. As stated earlier, I just put in the chat again the link to the webpage. That's where these slides are currently posted. In the coming days, we will have the recording of this webinar posted. So thank you again for joining, and I hope you all have a great day.